extensive experience and dedication to these crucial issues makes her the perfect guide for today's discussion. We are also honored to have with us Ashok Lavasa, former election commissioner and finance secretary of Government of India. His first-hand experience and deep understanding of the electoral process will provide invaluable perspectives. And we also have Professor Jagdeep H. Chokar, a founding member of the Association for Democratic Reforms. Professor Chokar contribution to promoting transparency and accountability in political process are widely recognized, and we look forward to his insights. The Bengaluru Collective, as some of you might know, is a public forum dedicated to upholding the constitutional rights and fostering a democratic, pluralistic, and inclusive society. Our commitment is reflected in the diverse discussions we have hosted in the past, covering topics from socio-economic census to the nexus between big business and politics and many other topics. These discussions have been instrumental in raising awareness and generating meaningful dialogue on the pressing issues of those times. All our previous discussions are available on our YouTube channel, and I request all of you to check it out. Links will be provided in the chat box. Thank you for being here, and thank you again for your continued commitment for our democratic values. Let's now welcome our esteemed panelists and begin this conversation. I'm handing over the mic to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sudeep, and welcome to everyone to this important webinar being organized by the Bengaluru Collective, and it's titled Umpiring Elections 2024, the Role of Election Commission of India. So we're in the midst, in fact, pretty much towards the closing part of the elections, and just to get an idea of the numbers, there are nearly 100 crore voters, more than 10 lakh polling stations, and we've seen how elections have been proceeding all across the country since the 19th of April, so been more than 1 month. And June 4 is counting day when we get the final verdict of what's happened. There has, of course, been a lot of speculation and worry and concern expressed by different people and commentators on that. But the focus of today's topic is really the Election Commission of India, which is the constitutional body which has the constitutional mandate to ensure free and fair elections in the country. If you look at its powers under the Constitution, it has essentially plenary powers, which essentially means unlimited, unconditional powers in the matter of holding elections. It can take measures which are ordinarily not allowed for bodies, because it is seen that free and fair elections are crucial for ensuring public trust and for upholding democracy in the country. We've also seen this time that there has been unprecedented public scrutiny and commentary on the role of the Election Commission. A lot of it has been about raising concerns, raising questions, and seeking answers from the Election Commission of India. But it's not the first time that this is happening. Even if you look at the 2019 elections, a lot of questions and concerns were raised, especially around selective action, or rather inaction, especially over allegations of violations of Model Code of Conduct. We all saw how Namo TV suddenly appeared on the airwaves and then equally mysteriously disappeared once elections were over. Till date, we don't know who allowed that particular TV channel to start airing. Did they have the necessary licensing and necessary permits? And it's something on which the ECI remained silent. We also saw over questions of hate speech, over questions of very serious sort of complaints that were made both by opposition parties and by people at large. There was no inaction and there was no action. And in fact, one of the people who's joining us and who's going to be speaking today, Mr. Ashok Lavasa, was in the Election Commission at that time. And when he did express his dissent over the issuing of clean chits, that dissent was also suppressed and not allowed to be recorded. And of course, we know that later he resigned from the post as well. Following the 2019 elections, given the concerns and largely the lack of response from the ECI, a civil society effort was set up, which was titled the Citizens Commission on Elections. This was under the leadership and chairmanship of Justice Lokur, who is a retired judge of the Supreme Court. And an extensive exercise of looking at various facets of elections was undertaken, including one of the primary issues that was taken up was the performance of the Election Commission. A very detailed analysis was done highlighting various cases of violations on which no action was taken, various departures from past practices, also on the issue of publication of data, also on concerns regarding certain mismatching of data. That is also an issue that's currently pending in the Supreme Court. And very detailed recommendations were in fact put together. Several efforts were made by that group, including by retired government officials, to try and engage with the ECI, to try and seek meetings, to try and get a response, because ultimately all of us believe that ensuring free and fair elections is not just a concern of the Election Commission of India, rather it's a concern of every single citizen of the country, and we are equal stakeholders in the whole process. Unfortunately, we saw complete lack of engagement and, if I may even say so, stonewalling of efforts of trying to engage with the Election Commission. More recently, of course, some of you may have seen some of the comments made by the Chief Election Commissioner on Saturday, wherein there is now not just a reluctance, but almost trying to say that we are watching who all are these people raising questions, and one day we will give response. Almost, I mean, almost like some sort of a threat, perhaps it could be termed as. So certainly it's been a deeper, longer engagement, but I believe that this time the kind of concerns and interests that we are seeing happen across the country. People have been very alive to issues of voter turnout figures not coming out. We've seen people being alive to the issue of hate speeches not being acted upon. And also, when finally action was taken, the leaders of the ruling party are not even named in those notices. So we have a very vast canvas to cover, and we are joined by two very esteemed and very experienced speakers with us. I would first like to invite Mr. Ashok Lavasa to give his views both on what does he see as the role of the commission this time, what are the concerns, and also what are some of the steps that could be taken perhaps to address this gap between public trust and the performance of the Election Commission. Like I said, Mr. Lavasa is a former Election Commissioner of India and has first-hand experience of conducting elections, and also, in fact, of trying to ensure that the Election Commission did not act in a partisan way and was actually responsive and accountable to people. So over to you, Mr. Lavasa, for the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Amrita, and thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak to such a distinguished audience. I am not here to either defend the Election Commission or to condemn it, but because of the experience that I have, I'll try to present a picture which benefits from my inside experience of the working of the Election Commission, and of course what one hears is happening these days. But discussing the role of the Election Commission at this stage as an umpire is almost like talking about umpiring when the last few overs are to be bowled. Be that as it may, before we delve into the role of the current Election Commission and how it is perceived to have performed during these general elections, I just want to place on record that the Election Commission for the last more than 7 decades has served the country very well. It has strengthened the institution itself of democracy in India. It has earned the confidence of the people and the trust of the people. And I would not be exaggerating that at one point, it was probably rated as an institution which has the highest regard by the citizens of this country. And for this, I think credit should go to people who have built this institution in the past. We all have heard of several people, but I just want to share with the audience let's say, the role played by the first Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Sukumar Sen. And the reason why I'm mentioning his role is to bring out two things. One, how he gave importance to the building of this institution, to the building of the system, and how he also thought that the electoral role, the sanctity of the electoral role, and the care taken in preparation of the electoral role probably is one of the core functions that the Election Commission performs. And all of you are learned enough, you know that he took more than a year to purify the role, as it were, went from state to state, knocked off almost 2.8 million voters who were not disclosing their entity. So that is one part, the importance that he attached to the electoral role, which is part of the routine functioning of the commission. And the second thing is that despite the enormous pressure that he was under to announce the first elections, I think he took his time to satisfy himself. And we all know that he was working with a personality as towering as the first Prime Minister of India. And despite an announcement made by the Prime Minister that the elections will be held at a particular time, he took more than a year, in fact, 1.5 years, to get the elections rolling. And that is the stellar story of the first elections we all know. And one more thing that I want to say is that he was still the Chief Election Commissioner when the second general elections took place. And they were also under very challenging, trying circumstances. I think, and he had the challenge of either the country seeing a constitutional amendment to extend the tenure of the House or to conduct the elections before a certain date. And I think we saw that the second general elections were conducted in less than 3 weeks. So I think that was the kind of challenge that he rose to. And subsequently, we find that succeeding election commissioners, chief election commissioners, they have gradually, brick by brick, built this institution. And that is how it has earned the confidence of the people. The second thing that I want to highlight about the Election Commission is that, you know, the Constitution of India has created many institutions. All the institutions that have been created in the Constitution, whether it is the Parliament, or it is the judiciary, or it is the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, or it is the Periodic Finance Commission that is set up, or the tribunals. So name any institution that has been created under the Constitution, and you will find that all these institutions, their working has a close interrelationship with the working of the government. There is only one institution, that is the Election Commission of India, which has a direct relationship with the citizens of the country. Its functioning depends only to a limited extent on the government because it needs the support of the government, A, for providing a budget, and B, for moving legislations, for changing the procedures or bringing about new laws that affect the elections. So I think that is something which we must recognize. And it is this trust, this direct bond that the Election Commission has with the citizens, which is under stress, as it were, these days, and which is what people are talking about. So the second thing that I want to highlight is that, unfortunately, all of us look at the Election Commission only during the elections. And to my mind, the working of the Election Commission, probably 90% or 95% of it is a routine functioning which keeps happening 365 days of the year. And even in the conduct of elections, like what Amrita said about an electoral roll of 980 million people, so many million polling stations, so many people to be mobilized, resources, all that. And laying down a standard operating procedure, handling so many machines, handling so much transportation, logistics, coordination of the entire exercise. I think all that happens with a great degree of efficiency. And for that, there is this repeated training, there are procedures which are laid down and which are trainings are conducted. There is a systematic voter education program. So that is, I think, bulk of the functioning of the Election Commission, but quite clearly, I mean, that is something which people take for granted, that this is what the Election Commission is supposed to be doing. So if it does it well, that's all right. That is the minimum we expect from the Commission. But there is this maybe 5 or 10% of the functioning of the Election Commission, which gets highlighted during the elections. And that has something to do with what I call the discretionary aspect of the functioning of the Election Commission. All that I was talking about is a non-discretionary part, which works like a mechanical clock, which works according to a standard operating procedure. But when you come to the discretionary part, I think that is where the focus shifts on the decisions that the Election Commission takes during these 3 months, or the way it handles the activities of various political parties, candidates. I think all this comes under scrutiny, and this is what people comment about. So I think what is happening now in the current situation is there are 3 types of, let's call them crises, which have affected the image of the Election Commission. One is, for want of a better word, call it crisis of character. The other is competence. And the third one is the conduct during the elections. Now, we all know that the appointment of the election commissioners itself came in for a lot of debate, discussion, controversy. For the last 1.5 years or more, this has been a subject which everybody has been engaged in. The fact that for 7 decades, election commissioners were being appointed as per a process, and that process produced mostly an outcome which people have not commented adversely upon, in the sense that the election commissioners who were selected under the old process, where there was no law to govern the appointment of election commissioners, the appointments made then and the performance of those individuals was by and large found to be acceptable. But in its wisdom, the Supreme Court directed, and then we have seen the entire debate, controversy which arose because of a legislation which excluded the Chief Justice. Now, I am very clear that I don't think that a process and an outcome always have a positive correlationship, because the outcome can be quite different even if the process is good, and vice versa. So, but the fact that the composition of the committee was such that people thought that here is a situation where the government will appoint people of its own choice, which is what it had been doing in the past as well. But the exclusion of an outsider clearly created an opinion which prejudiced against the government. So that is one thing which we need to take note of. So that is where people thought and presumed that anybody who is appointed with this process is bound to be a favorite of the government, and you can't expect them to perform well. So I think that has created a bias against the election commissioners who are appointed under this process. I am not saying that the experience which people have had, because I think we need to give people a chance. So now let us look at the performance of the election commission. So the process is something which has been legislated upon, and we have the product before us. Now let us see the performance of the election commission. But before we get into the second part, I want to focus also on the fact that, you see, even the routine functioning of the election commission in the intervening period between 2 general elections, I think this is something which doesn't get discussed in the intervening period. Only during the elections, people start talking about the election commission. And let me highlight, say, three things. One is that what happens to all the cases that are registered as violations of the model code, which also in many cases are offenses or violations committed under existing laws. And I believe that this is something which needs to be seriously tracked. In fact, there should be a separate monitoring mechanism to show what happened to all the electoral offenses or offenses that happened during the conduct of elections, and were they taken to their logical conclusion. Because if the prosecution, if people feel that, okay, cases will be registered during elections, but eventually they will peter out and nothing will happen. So their attitude towards so-called offenses, I think that becomes a little lax. So in the Election Commission or in the National Crime Records Bureau, I think there has to be a separate window created where electoral offenses are separately shown, just as they have various classifications of offenses. So similarly, electoral offenses should be separately classified and monitored. Take the case of all the money which is seized during elections. What happens to that subsequently? Take the case of scrutiny of expenditure accounts submitted by people, the candidates. Take the case of those candidates who do not submit their expenditure accounts. So are these things properly tracked? So the point that I want to highlight is that the functioning of the Election Commission during the intervening period of elections, which may be deemed to be a routine activity, I think it has a lot of importance, and due importance should be attached to it if we have to make the system more effective. So that is the second thing that I want to highlight. The third thing is the conduct of elections itself, and that is where I said the focus is all on what are the areas in which Election Commission uses its discretionary authority. The non-discretionary part, I don't think people quarrel about. The discretionary part is something which always gets discussed. And I think that one of the problems is that the Election Commission tries to operate within existing rules, regulations, and the belief that it needs to intervene only where there are gaps in law. But the contradiction is that under Article 324, it has plenipotentiary powers. It is the sole authority to supervise, to conduct, and provide superintendence over elections, ensure that there is a level playing field. By the way, I think you might know that the word free and fair is not used in the Constitution. I think the Constitution makers presumed that elections would be free and fair always. So there was no question of saying that elections should be free and fair. But the responsibility of the Election Commission in providing a level playing field, I think that responsibility is supreme, and it has the sole authority to ensure. So the view that has prevailed in the judiciary and in the minds of people is that Election Commission, quite rightly so, has a reservoir of infinite authority, which it should exercise if it feels that there is anything which is violating the free and fair elections or it is disturbing the level playing field. So whether it is an offense which is covered under existing law, it is a provision which doesn't exist under existing law, I think Election Commission has a responsibility and it has the authority to take notice of all these activities which disturb the level playing field and intervene in the manner in which it thinks appropriate. So, and that is what raises expectations quite rightly so, in the minds of people. And they think that here is an authority, here is a referee, here is an umpire which can do anything it wants in order to ensure that there is a fair game that goes on. So in that, for example, let's begin with the scheduling of elections itself. The moment election schedule is announced, people do feel that why is it so long? And I think this is a question which is very valid. There is a serious need, according to me, to review the entire scheduling of elections in order to make it short. I mean, look at the way we have been in it already for about 10 weeks. 16th of March, the elections were announced. It is not that Election Commission has done it for the first time. Even the last two occasions, elections were held in 7 schedules. The duration was a little shorter. This time the duration is long. And there could be valid reasons why it happens like that. But having said that, and without attributing any motive to anyone, I think that there is a need to very seriously review, along with all people who support the conduct of elections, all the departments, different stakeholders, to see how we can shorten the duration of this election. There are chief election commissioners who have gone on record to say that they can conduct the elections nationwide in 33 days. So I don't know whether 33 days or 2 phases or 3 phases, but I think there is a need for a review. And I'm quite willing to believe that we do have the wherewithal in which we can conduct the elections in a shorter period of time, maybe in 3 or 4 phases. That will definitely improve the quality of campaigning. It will put less stress on resources of everybody. And I think it will also shorten the duration in which several controversies are created. The second is the violation of the Model Code of Conduct. And there again, every time the elections are announced, there are a lot of violations that take place. I've written extensively about it. Election Commission takes some decisions. In some cases, it does not take timely decisions, or the decisions that it eventually takes, they don't satisfy people. There are opinions. The media is watching. People are saying that these are blatant violations and why Election Commission is not taking decisions. I think this is a criticism which has happened in the past. And my response to this is that it is high time that the Model Code of Conduct undergoes a thorough overhaul. Times have changed. Environment in which elections are conducted have changed. Technology has changed. The means people adopt to go around the Model Code of violation, they have increased. So many things are happening in the real world, which, as I repeatedly say, which might meet the requirement of the letter of the Model Code, but they certainly violate the spirit of the Model Code. So how do you get to create a situation in which the letter and the spirit both are adhered to? So in the review of the Model Code, I think we need to spell out the consequences, the likely consequences that will follow in case there are violations. It is possible to discuss with all the stakeholders, categorize the kind of offenses which have been included in the Model Code, and say that for these offenses, this is the kind of restriction or consequences that will follow. It should be there for people to see and to know that this is what can happen in case we are found to be violating. The third thing that I feel is that the entire process of enforcement of Model Code of Conduct, it should be open to public scrutiny. There should be a page on the website of the Election Commission. All complaints should be recorded there. The action taken should be recorded there. There has to be a time-bound procedure within which all these complaints are decided. What the decision finally is, I think that can be a matter of debate. But at least people may quarrel about the quantum of or the decision taken by the commission, but at least let the decisions be taken in a time-bound fashion. And finally, I feel that it is high time that the political parties are also made responsible for the actions of omission or commission on the part of their star campaigners, because they decide who the star campaigners are, and they should also take the responsibility of ensuring, and the parties also should be made responsible in the sense that some consequences should follow. I can't say today what those consequences will be, because after all, this is a process which will evolve after discussion. So let me stop here and end by saying that, Election Commission, as you have said, is an umpire. And when you are a referee in a match, you don't have to take your decision on the basis of the person who is committing a violation or the person against whom an appeal has been made. For the referee, everybody is equal. And it reminds me of a joke which we used to hear as college students. There was a certain match between India and Pakistan, and Pakistani captain is said to have mentioned that you give me so and so players from the Indian team, and I can beat the entire world. And Bishan Singh Bedi was the captain of Indian team. He said, "You give me two Pakistani empires, and I can defeat the entire world." So, but election is not a joke, and I think we need to take it seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lavasa. Those are very detailed comments, and I think covering sort of a historical aspect. In fact, if I put forth one of the statistics that's come forward in the last few days, it actually speaks to what you said, that historically the Election Commission of India has been seen as one of the most robust institutions, one that perhaps enjoyed unprecedented public trust even when other institutions were under a cloud. But recently, a CSDS survey showed that more than half the voters, or rather, the percentage of people who have now lost trust has actually doubled in the last 5 years. So perhaps that's also an issue of concern, certainly for the Election Commission of India. You laid out some very important aspects of what are the crises facing the commission, and also some steps certainly on transparency that can help address it, and also some of the larger reforms. So I'll now invite Professor Jagdeep Chokar. I think anyone who follows elections knows of the work of ADR, which has been doing election watch work across states and across national elections for the last 25 years. It's been at the forefront of efforts to make elections more transparent, more accountable, take forward the cause of voters' right to information. I mean, if I start listing out the cases, it'll take a lot of the time, and that's we would rather hear from Jagdeep ji in that time. So, Jagdeep ji, over to you. Also, in terms of someone who's observed elections over the years, what are the areas of concerns that you see this time? And also, do you sense sort of a change in how the ECI treats public concerns or even criticism? Because that's also something that we've all read recently about what happened in the Supreme Court and the kind of affidavit that was filed, raising a lot of questions, ascribing motivations to petitioners. So over to you for the next 20 minutes.
Thank you, Amrita. I am I consider it a pleasure and a big relief to follow Mr. Lavasa because most of what he has said, I entirely agree with. And he has not only given us the history of the Election Commission from the first election where he mentioned Mr. Kumar Sen. I also have heard him say in another discussion that the first election had something like 62 phases, if I am not wrong. And that is remarkable. His historical description and his suggestions for improvements that things should happen within the Election Commission, like setting up a cell to follow the cases, like public scrutiny of election MCC complaints, etc., are very useful. And I think those suggestions can only be given by a person who knows the inside working of the election. On my part, we have been dealing with the Election Commission, and when I say we, I mean the Association for Democratic Reforms, ADR for short. We have been dealing with the Election Commission since 1999. It is now 25 years. There will be 25 years in December. It is actually quite interesting to say. I just computed this numbers as I was listening to Mr. Lavasa, that from 1999 till about 2018, our relationship with the Election Commission was extremely positive and kind of synergistic. We would make suggestions to the Election Commission, and Election Commission would suggest, come back with their responses, and they would say, do you think we should alter this or do that, or can we do something else? And at times the Election Commission would tell us, this needs to be done. We might find it difficult to do it ourselves. Why don't you do something to get it done? And we tried to do that. But around 2018 or so, things started changing. And 2019 election, as Amrita had said, was quite a watershed when things did not happen as they had been happening in the past. And those of the audience who might remember that it was in 2019, after the 2019 election, that ADR filed the first petition on EVM VVPAT issue. Till then, we were of the opinion that EVMs are doing very well and there was no problem with them. But during the 2019 election counting process, it turned out that the Election Commission would put out counting data on its website, and that data would change every day, which is perfectly understandable. But there were discrepancies in the votes polled and votes counted. And those discrepancies would also change, and sometimes they went into lakhs. And when this was brought to the notice of the Election Commission, they stopped putting this data on their website. When we asked them the reasons for it, the reasons were not to our satisfaction. And I can tell you that I personally visited the Election Commission's office, met several people there, deputy chief election commissioners and so on, who were dealing with this information. And we were not satisfied with what was told to us. And then the Election Commission issued a notification or a clarification on its own website, where it said that the authenticated, confirmed data of the votes polled and votes counted will be available after 2 or 3 weeks of the declaration of the results. It was at that time that we filed the 2019 petition, in which we said that we have no quarrel or nothing to say about the results of the 2019 election, but a robust and transparent mechanism for counting of votes should be made. That is what we requested. And we thought it was not an adversarial situation. But over the years, it turned out that the Election Commission evolved into taking all our actions as adversarial. And of course, in the EVM case and in the Form 17 case, the affidavit filed by the Election Commission, for anybody who has read it, will know that they are obviously not at all happy with what ADR has been doing, which of course is their choice. I'm not commenting or questioning that. But the fact is that for 19 years, things went off very well. But in 6 years, things seem to change. Now, some of the major issues that we found out in the 2019 election and subsequently, which happened in this election also, I would mention, I think, 4 major points here. The first was, which I also wrote about in the report of the Citizens Commission on Elections, the inconsistency in the application of the Model Code of Conduct. And in that chapter, I have also mentioned specific examples from the 2019 election. A corollary to that was that the Election Commission, even in 2019 election, seemed to be very, very lenient towards the ruling party and comparatively speaking, much more strict with the opposition parties. Now, that situation, if anything, has worsened in the 2024 election. As I had mentioned earlier, that it was said that the Chief Election Commissioner, after he cast his vote, he said, "We are watching who are trying to create disaffection with the process." And I lightheartedly mentioned that they don't have to watch. Some of them, those people have also been writing letters to the Election Commission. And two of those people are Dr. E.A.S. Sarma, a former secretary to the Government of India, and I. He writes a letter and I write a letter supporting his letter. It is a kind of a consistent pattern now. It is not having any effect, but we are doing what we think is right. So, in consistent application of the Model Code of Conduct is one of the foremost reasons why, as Mr. Lavasa said, you give me two Pakistani empires and I will beat the whole world. So we seem to have, again in a light-hearted manner, we seem to have Pakistani empires in the Election Commission. Again, it is light-hearted. It is not meant to be any aspersion on anybody. But the application of the Model Code of Conduct is inconsistent, to say the least. And while I agree with Mr. Lavasa's proposal that political parties must be held responsible for the behavior and actions of their star campaigners, it is absolutely right. And the Supreme Court has also said that political parties should be held responsible for choice of their candidates in the matter of criminalization. But political parties, we can have a separate seminar on political parties. The lack of responsibility of political parties, I think, is a very, very important issue. And how can anyone make them responsible? I would be very happy to know that, and I'd be very grateful for that. I may comment on this a little later. The second problem with the Election Commission that has come across, is become more so in the recent years, is lack of transparency. Now, lack of transparency, I don't have to describe this in any detail because it is quite clear. And what is an irony is that on one day in the Supreme Court, the lawyer for the Election Commission says that giving information about the total number of votes cast will be a very laborious process and it will take a lot of time and energy and people. And the Supreme Court says, yes, we agree, you don't need to do that. And the very next day, the Election Commission gives out that information for all those phases for which elections have been held. Now, this is, I believe, and I say this with my full sense of responsibility, and not only lack of transparency, it is also, I think, making a false statement in the Supreme Court, saying that it will take a lot of time and effort, and the very next day it is given. As a matter of fact, somebody commented on Twitter, a senior lawyer, that this seems to be, snooking their nose at the Election Commission and saying you can do it on the Supreme Court, that you can do what you like, but you cannot order us. We will do it if you don't order us, but we will do it on our own, but we will not allow you to order us to do that. So this is very strange, and this is, people have also commented that this is somewhat like what the State Bank of India did in the case of electoral bonds, which is very, very unfortunate. The third situation that I think is very disturbing is, I have commented on it, the adversarial stance against civil society. And of course, civil society in this case, since ADR has been a petitioner in several such cases. So our lawyers have said in the Supreme Court that this is not adversarial litigation. And in the EVM, so-called EVM case, the bench made two suggestions themselves. and they said this is to improve the system. But when some citizens or civil society organizations make suggestions to improve the system, that is considered to be an action to reduce the confidence of the nation in the electoral process. This is again very, very inexplicable, but the intention of a lot of citizen group is to improve the system. As like we said in the 2019 petition, I admit that there may be some litigation which comes under the garb of public interest litigation, which may be motivated. It may be private interest litigation or professional interest litigation and so on and so forth. But it is sad to see all such efforts to be brushed with the same tar and so on. So the adversarial stance of the Election Commission since 2018 or so has been very debilitating. For 19 years, the Election Commission was not adversarial. Things happened. But now it seems to be that the Election Commission is a fortress, and anybody trying to do anything to cross the boundary and suggest something is doing something wrong. So this adversarial stance, not only in litigation, even in other suggestions. I mean, there was a time when somebody wrote a letter to the Election Commission, one got an acknowledgement, and in due time a response. But that has not happened since 2019. In 2019 election, I myself wrote letters to which there was neither an acknowledgement nor a response. So adversarial stance is difficult, is sort of sad. What follows from it is ignoring citizens as stakeholders. Not only had once the Attorney General of India said in the Supreme Court that why do citizens need to know who funds political parties? Citizens have a right to know who funds or where do candidates get their money from, but they don't need to know where political parties get their money from. I happened to be present in the Supreme Court that day, and there was a hushed silence for a few seconds as to what has the Attorney General said. But the same thing was said by the current Attorney General also. So this seems to be a very consistent stance, and the Election Commission also says repeatedly that this is accessible to the polling agents of candidates, to candidates and to political parties. But the Election Commission seems to forget that the elections are not held for the pleasure or satisfying the needs or requirements of political parties and political candidates. They are held for the citizens to vote. And the same situation actually happened in the Law Commission of India, if I may digress. As an anecdote, the Law Commission of India was holding hearings on this one nation, one election. And I had gone there to make a presentation. And I said things against it, and I said this should not be done. And a member of the Law Commission asked me that if all political parties agree that this should be done, then what is your problem? I had then told the gentleman that, and he was a gentleman, that, the election is not the sole proprietorship of political parties. We as citizens also have a role. As a matter of fact, if there was no citizens and if no citizen decided to vote, what will the Election Commission and political parties do? So in the earlier situation, the Election Commission realized that it was actually, Election Commission is technically and legally answerable to the Constitution of India. And the Constitution of India was given to ourselves by the citizens of India. And therefore, through the Constitution, the Election Commission of India is accountable to the people of India. But this is a very strange thing that political parties and political candidates are the last word in this case. I want to make a few other comments, and I think I have some time. The plenary powers of the Election Commission, and Mr. Lavasa will perhaps correct they are circumscribed by laws made by the Parliament and the judgments given by the Supreme Court and the High Courts. These are the two limits on the powers of the Election Commission. Anything which is not covered by this is within the power of the Election Commission to do. And in the context of the Election Commission making political parties responsible, I have sympathy for the Election Commission on this, because what can the Election Commission do to a political party? At the most, it can freeze or withdraw its symbol under the symbols order. The irony in our system today is that a political party, once registered by the Election Commission under Section 29A of the Representation of People Act, cannot be derecognized. The Supreme Court, in a case which is called Indian National Congress versus something, has actually specifically said that Section 29A gives power to the Election Commission to recognize political parties. It does not give it power to derecognize political parties. So Election Commission has in its wisdom, and I appreciate those efforts. Sometimes it takes that we have taken parties off the list. Now, which is that list? And is that list official or legal? We don't know, at least I don't know. But this is a fact that the Election Commission today, under the judgment of the Supreme Court, cannot deregister a political parties. It can derecognize, but cannot deregister. So this is a strange irony that I think India is the only country in the world where a political party, once registered, will remain registered unless there are three exceptions to this rule. And unless those three exceptions apply, it will stay registered ad infinitum. The other observation I will make is that Mr. Lavasa rightly mentioned that the Election Commission is paid attention to only during elections. That is by and large true. But there are some people who perhaps have nothing better to do, who also, by the Supreme Court's opinion, who also pay attention to the Election Commission while the elections are not known. And that is why we filed the petition in the 2019 after the elections were over. But tragically, that petition was not heard and has not been heard even till today. In the application that we filed for Form 17C, it has been said that it should be heard after the vacations are over. So people do pay attention, but not enough of us pay attention. That is correct. In the appointment process, I agree that for 75 years it was working perfectly well. But I am also confused about the appointment of one election commissioner while the case was being heard in the Supreme Court. I don't want to name the individual, but the fact is that the appointment of that individual was commented upon by the Supreme Court in its judgment over 3 or 4 pages. And they said it was done in mysterious circumstances and at lightning speed. Ironically, the same individual also resigned under very mysterious circumstances. And that mystery of his resignation is still not been clarified. So appointments of election commissioners in the past, and there had been situations, I mean, there was a famous situation of Mr. T.N. Session, who was the sole election commission because there were no election commissioners. He was the only one. The government appointed 2 election commissioners seemingly to curb the powers or the actions of Mr. Session. And he went to court against that appointment and lost the case. And after about a year, the government, in its own wisdom, abolished those 2 positions. And then the chief election commissioner was the only one. And then after some time, 2 more positions were created. So things have been happening in the election commission, some good, some not so good. But the fact that it took some people, ADR included, to file a petition on the appointment of election commissioners was because the actions of the election commission post 2018 and 19. During that period from 1999 to 2018 or so, we had seen many election commissioners and chief election commissioners. Some were good, some were not so good. But it was not so blatant that we felt like doing something about it. So the system was working satisfactorily with minor aberrations here and there, and I can name people which I obviously will not. Therefore, the petition was filed that a law should be made. But the law was made which satisfies the letter of the judgment, but not the spirit of the judgment. Because the judgment also explained in about 100 plus pages the rationale for such kind of a process. And that rationale was overlooked. We have, of course, challenged that law in the court, but we will see what happens. What else can I say? I think declaration of, okay, that's all right. In conclusion, I guess I would say that the Election Commission as an institution had a sterling reputation. I am sad and pained to say that the reputation stands dented. Not that it is beyond redemption. It can certainly be redeemed, and I hope it will be redeemed. But the current situation seems a little difficult, and the results of this election will perhaps tell us what the end story is. So as they said in the picture, abhi baki hai mere dost, we are watching the picture closely. We are trying to do what we can. We are trying to actually strengthen the electoral process. And we have been partners of the Election Commission in the past for as many as something like 19 years. And therefore, what is happening today is a matter of great pain and anguish to us also. But I think we think it should be done, and we are trying to do it. We would be more than happy to see Election Commission regain its majestic position that it had, and we will continue to work towards that. So I think I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jagdeep, and as someone who's been engaging for more than 25 years, I mean, if I may say so, perhaps it's the Election Commission from civil society is really the work that ADR has been doing. I think it brings in a lot of comparative perspective as well, especially on the issue of concerns being expressed by citizens. So I'll briefly share some of my views, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I thought I'll share some of the sort of more recent experiences that we've had with the Election Commission, because I think they throw light to what both the speakers have discussed. So about 10, 12 days ago, some of us had gone to the Election Commission of India with a petition that was signed by more than 4,000 people, seeking that authenticated records of voter turnout, which as per the Election Commission's own documents is only Form 17C. So we said, why don't you place that in the public domain? Today, we've reached a place in technology where scanning of 2,000, 3,000 papers does not take more than 1.5 hours, maximum 2 hours. And the issue is not that one has to scan all 10 lakh forms together. We understand that at the end of the day of polling, all the Form 17Cs are actually collected at the returning officer's office. And we were suggesting to the Election Commission that perhaps in 24 hours or in 48 hours, or frankly, even 4 days later, why don't you start a system of simply scanning and uploading that onto the website? Now, actually, the experience of going to the Election Commission office itself was very interesting, because perhaps the Election Commission is no longer used to dealing with the public. So we were all stopped at the gate. No one was allowed to even step inside. So we were literally standing at Ashoka Road and trying to have a dialogue with someone. We got onto the phone. We said, we understand that election commissioners are, of course, very busy. There's no question of if they're not free to try and meet them. We said, any officer with in the election commission, somebody who can just take our memorandum, understand what the concern is. And they said, absolutely nothing doing. We said, all right, we'll come back during your public dealing hours. And this was the response of an officer on the phone. He said the Election Commission of India has no public dealing hours. I think that in itself sort of shows that perhaps over a period of time, we've reached a space where it has become acceptable for a public office to say that we do not have public dealing hours. Another instance, adding to what Jagdeep ji had said, after the Citizens Commission on Elections, a detailed memorandum was sent to the Election Commission of India, both via email, and it was hand delivered with the receiving. Nothing happened, no response, not even an acknowledgement or a diary number. So one RTI application was filed, and eventually the RTI application took its own time and finally reached before the Central Information Commission. I happened to go there for the hearing and simply pointed out that there's no response to the RTI application or to the first appeal. And when the Central Information Commissioner inquired from the ECI's officer that what happened, how come you're not replying, they said we neither got the memorandum nor the RTI nor the first appeal. And even the CIC had to sort of say that, what do you mean you haven't got anything? Each of them has got a receiving in terms of it was sent by email. The RTI was filed to your own online portal. So how can you say that? And I think these two instances, in a sense, just show how difficult it is to even try and engage and get responses from the Election Commission. Now, one of the comments, and I think several people have expressed their agreement on that, was that they're saying, would the speakers please also comment on what is it that people can do? So just from my end, just a couple of suggestions, since this is something that we've all been engaging on. I think certainly keep the demand for having authenticated voter turnout is something that we are all encouraging people across the country to do. And in fact, under Rule 93 of the Conduct of Election Rules, there is a provision for public inspection of all election papers, including Form 17C. So certainly approach your returning officer, and you'll have to carry a copy of those rules because perhaps they may not be aware of it. So it also becomes actually an exercise in creating awareness around those rules. So certainly that's one thing that can keep happening. And the various steps that Mr. Lavasa also enumerated, where we actually need to push for greater transparency, which includes cases of violations and action taken reports. And we totally agree with Mr. Lavasa that the focus on the Election Commission should not limit itself to the time during elections, but actually perhaps later even seek a report from them saying, why don't you give a full report on what were the complaints you received, what were the responses to each of those, also on the expenditure and the violations and the money seized, what all has happened to each of them. And I was looking at election processes and what happens when there are questions and concerns, and how do commissions, in a sense, respond across different countries. And there's a very interesting example that I came upon in Arizona, in the Maricopa County, which is where there were serious concerns and serious diminishing of public trust in the last elections in the US. And what they've done now is radical transparency. So what they've now done is that there is 24/7, 365 days of the year, web live casting of their counting center and of the balloting boxes. Like right now in America, there are no elections happening. But right now also, if you go on to Maricopa County election office, you see the whole office being fully live streamed. So perhaps also things to consider, even things like, we know that there is CCTV of the strong rooms happening across the country right now. Why not place that in the public domain? Let people also get a glimpse into how things are happening. It might certainly raise questions, but I think in the longer run, it certainly enhances transparency. So that's where I'll stop with what I had to just add my 2 bits to what both the speakers said. And I'll now switch over to questions. And I'll pose 2 or 3 questions from both. There are questions in the chat box, if you can also see them. And then there are also some questions that have come on YouTube. So let me read out some of those questions, take your comments, and then we'll again read out more questions. So one of the questions is that, who is it that the Election Commission is accountable to? Where do people go if there are complaints of unfair conduct by the Election Commission itself? And added to that is also, who do they report to? Is there any role of the president in terms of how the Election Commission is performing? And is there any time limit within which the commission has to respond to violations of Model Code of Conduct? So I think all of those are addressed to you, Mr. Lavasa, if you'd like to take them.
Thank you. I think the answer to that is that the Election Commission of India is obviously accountable to the people. It is accountable to the parliament, and it is also accountable to the President of India in terms of being the constitutional head. Uh, the administrative ministry, which handles the work of the Election Commission, is the Ministry of Law and Justice. But that is only for the purposes of maintaining, allocating budget, and moving certain administrative papers. But it has no control or supervision on the functioning of the Election Commission. However, I think, and let me also answer one more direct question, and that is about the violation time limit for disposing of the cases reported under violation of model code. Clearly, the model code itself is in operation for a limited period of time. And if cases are not disposed of immediately, I think they lose their purpose. So that is the reason why I'm saying that. And in the past, in fact, even I have seen that in bulk of the cases, the system is quite defined. The moment you get a complaint, you seek a report from the field to substantiate that complaint. And on receiving that report, the Election Commission's prima facie comes to the conclusion whether there is a violation, and then it gives an opportunity to the person who is accused of committing that violation to respond. And on receiving his or her explanation, which in the past or generally the practice is that you give 24 hours or 48 hours to the person to respond, and then the commission takes a decision. So in my view, I think it shouldn't take more than 5 or 6 days for the commission to take a decision. Whatever it decides, as I said, may satisfy some people, may not satisfy the others. But that's all right, as long as decisions are taken and transparency is maintained in the disposal of complaints. But one other thing that I wanted to mention, and which is related to this, is the entire process of electoral reforms that is bothering everyone is very interesting. That there are very few political parties, or there are very few occasions on which political parties will give importance to electoral reforms in their election manifestos. And even if they do mention it, the importance that they attach to actually carrying out these reforms when they are in power, I think the track record is not very good. And that is the reason why what Professor Chokar was saying, that Election Commission has also always been interested in electoral reforms. But when it sees that political parties, and this is across the line, whether party A or party B, whoever is in power, they generally don't show too much of enthusiasm about electoral reforms. So how does Election Commission pursue electoral reform agenda? Generally, as Professor Chokar said, civil society organizations who are interested and who are right-minded, who have an agenda, it may not be always acceptable. Their suggestions may not always be practicable or acceptable. That's another matter. But you have an ally on people in civil society, in citizens group, who are also interested in electoral reforms. And I said that the Election Commission of India has a direct bond with the people. It has nothing to do, because ruling party by its very nature may have its own interest. So therefore, the alienation which supposedly is taking place between Election Commission and civil society organizations, or even between the, as far as the media is concerned, I think that's not a good development, because media has always been used by the Election Commission, or perceived by the Election Commission, as a friend, as an ally, which does two-way communication. So I think that relationship should be maintained.
Okay, so
can I add a word to this?
can I add a couple of more questions addressed to you, Jagdeep ji?
Sure, sure.
So one question is that what is this issue of the increase in voter turnout? Perhaps since ECI is not clarifying, you would be best placed to clarify the issue. Another question is about voter deletions, and someone's written that many people names get deleted despite the rule that there has to be service given, an opportunity given to that person. So on if you respond to the earlier question and also both these questions, and then I'll come back with another round of questions.
Well, what I wanted to add to the earlier question was that Mr. Lavasa is absolutely correct when he says that citizens groups are an ally or should be an ally with the Election Commission. I agree with him. I also agree with him that political parties are not interested in electoral reforms. He was very, very mild. He said political parties are not very enthusiastic about electoral reforms. We have a record to show that on more than 5 occasions, political parties have come together, all political parties, regardless of their philosophy, if they have any, all political parties have come together to oppose electoral reforms. And the very first case that ADR first filed on criminalization, after the High Court gave a judgment, the Union of India appealed to the Supreme Court against the High Court judgment. And when the Supreme Court upheld the High Court's judgment, the Election Commission implemented the Supreme Court's orders, and all party meeting decided that that will not be allowed to happen. And the Parliament, first the government issued a ordinance, and then that ordinance was converted into law by the Parliament unanimously. And then we went to the Supreme Court again saying that the amendment of the Representation of People Act was unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court agreed that it was unconstitutional. So political parties are not only not enthusiastic, sir, they are enthusiastically trying to block electoral reforms. The same thing has happened in bringing political parties under the right to information law. So political party, and that's why in the beginning, I said a little mildly that making political parties behave responsibly is a very difficult task. As a matter of fact, the irresponsible behavior of political parties is behind a lot of ills of the Election Commission or the election process. And not to divulge too much, we have actually been in a situation where the first response of the Election Commission to a court case was not positive. Actually, in the criminalization issue itself, the Election Commission, when the Union of India appealed to the Supreme Court in a special petition, the first affidavit the Election Commission filed was not really very positive or supportive. That was the time we actually met some people in the Election Commission, some of whom are not alive today. Therefore, I am sharing this information. Then we explained to them what we were trying to do. And in their next affidavit, the Election Commission changed its view and supported what we were doing. So these citizens groups are more than happy, but after 19 years, the same citizen groups seem to have become the villain of the piece. This is an irony of fate or a twist of fate. On the voter turnout issue, a certain degree of change in the voter turnout is acceptable. But 6% to 6.6% without giving the total number of voters, and then increase of 1.2 crores or 1.4 crores that one reads about without any explanation. This is the question of lack of transparency. I mean, there could be many reasons for this change, and some of them would be justified. If the Election Commission would just take the citizens into confidence, I think a lot of this issue will get over, but that is a very big if. Now, voter deletion. This is an issue which has been around for quite some time. In an earlier election in Karnataka, several lakhs of voters were deleted. And there was apparent evidence to show that the deletions were systemic and systematic. And after a hue and cry, some 16 lakhs voters' names were reinstated in the electoral roll. Similar situation happened in Rajasthan on a much smaller scale. The survey was on a smaller scale, and similar deviations were found. And this keeps occurring every now and then. I totally agree with Mr. Lavasa, and even Dr. Qureshi has said so many times that rather than civil society wasting its time on EVMs, they should focus on electoral rolls. I don't think the time spent on EVMs is a waste of time. I disagree with Dr. Qureshi respectfully. But I agree, electoral rolls are a very major issue. And it is such an issue which actually, in my limited information or opinion, is not possible to maintain 100% correct electoral roll all the time. Because it is people move so much and so much happens. But Election Commission should be more forthcoming about what it does, how does it do it, and it should be responsive to individual, not complaints, but grievances. I mean, I moved from Ahmedabad to Delhi, and I have my own tale to tell how I got a voter registration card in Delhi, which is another story which I don't want to relive. I don't want to be autobiographical. But voter deletion in a systemic and systematic way is a matter which seems to happen. There can be no concrete proof. And this concrete proof is a standard which the Election Commission said even in the EVM case, that there is no concrete evidence. I mean, if you don't give us information, how will we give you evidence? Information bhi aapke paas hai aur evidence humne. So this is a little unfair battle, if there were to be a battle, which it is not. So voter deletion is something that Election Commission has to be proactive about. And actually, ultimately, what it needs is more and open communication. And as the Supreme Court has repeatedly said, we should trust the Election Commission. The Election Commission should also trust some of the citizens, if not all the citizens.
Can I say something on the voter registration
Yes,
and
yes.
turnout data? Or you want to take other questions?
Okay, so I'll just add 2, 3 more questions and then. So just on this voter deletion, I helped several people through this round of elections checking whether or not they were deleted. And I thought that there's a very simple suggestion to, in fact, address the issue. So where it says that put in your EPIC number to check your polling station, if you've been deleted, all it says is no data found. Whereas in contrast, if I put in an EPIC number and if that's been deleted, they could actually say that you were deleted in July of 2023 because of XYZ issue. I think just something as simple as that will really help people understand what was the reason that they got deleted. But let me go back to questions. So one question to Mr. Lavasa. This time we've seen some constituencies where there has been no contest at all. So how do you see that? What do you think should happen? Do you think a repoll should be ordered? And connected to that is another question, that how should we view this question of people being prevented from filing nominations or being forced to file it at the last minute, even though they were willing to file it earlier, which does not leave them time for making corrections? I mean, this in a sense goes to absolutely the heart of who all are in the fray. So how do you see these two questions, and then whatever you wanted to add on voter deletion?
So the two things about, what do you do if everybody withdraws, or what do you do if nobody files a nomination? I've written an article on this in the past, and there are certain loopholes in the law. So first of all, you see, during the period of elections, I think as far as the conduct of elections is concerned, the process of filing nomination, scrutiny, withdrawal, the conduct of actual polls, the returning officer is the boss. He has the legal authority to take decisions. What happened in the case of Surat, for example, where a candidate, all the candidates withdrew, and there was only one person left in the fray. So there could be two opinions in this. One opinion would be that whatever happened as per prescribed law. So no questions asked. If somebody has a grievance later, I don't know whether there can be an election petition on this, but the law does provide, the existing law does provide for anybody to file a nomination, to withdraw a nomination. But as I said, that if there is a specific complaint that somebody has been prevented from exercising his right, then Election Commission, to my mind, is within its authority to inquire, investigate, and then take corrective measures. That is the way I look at it, because as Professor Choker said, Election Commission has its own limitation in adhering to judgments pronounced and laws laid down. That is fine. But even so, if there is a blatant violation of a right, then probably Election Commission, if it interferes in the process of free and fair election, could exercise its discretion and take a decision. Because during the course of the elections, I think it has supreme authority. That is number one. On the question of Professor Choker said that what if citizens, nobody votes? Unfortunately, the law today says that if 100% voters in a constituency decide not to cast their vote, so what do you think will happen? There is no repoll. It will be deemed to be that all the candidates have got equal votes. And then you decide by the spin of a coin. I mean, not a coin, but you have a toss, because that process is laid down. And that is the way you determine the final outcome. So this is what I have pointed out in my article, that the law as it exists today can actually mean that the elections can be managed between parties and the election machinery, and that's the end of it. The voters can, do whatever they want about it if they boycott the election completely. So I think we need to review all this. Although when I discussed this with one of the lawyers, he said, oh, this is a remote possibility, it will never happen. So, but on the more substantive aspect of, deletion and the voter turnout data, two simple things that I want to mention is that, there has been an effort on the part of Commission in the past. First of all, the EPIC card which was issued, I think that never existed earlier. So everybody voter can have an EPIC card. But there have been suggestions that once a person has an EPIC card, then his name should never be deleted from the electoral roll. But unfortunately, the way the system works is that unless your name is there in the electoral roll belonging to a particular polling station, even if you have an EPIC card, you can't vote. And this is something where I think citizens are not exercising, serious. They don't take it seriously at the appropriate time, that I must make sure that my name is there in the electoral roll. What you said, Amrita, about the voter app saying no data found. Yes, I agree that it can be more specific. But the moment there is no data found, it is a cause for alarm, for you to check. It is surprising that when I visit educational colleges, for example, and you're dealing with people who are literate, half the people who are eligible, 18, 19, they don't even get themselves registered as voters. So I think we need to look at it as citizens also. On the turnout data, in the past, let's be honest, even in the past, there have been differences between figures given out on the day of the poll, subsequently which were uploaded, and final number statistics. All that may change, and it has changed. I think questions were not asked because people trusted the Election Commission, and there was transparency in the release of data. But not releasing the data is something which I don't understand. It is like organizing a cricket match and saying that we'll not put up the score on the scoreboard. There is a scorer who maintains the score, and we will let you know after 5 days or at the end of the day how many runs were scored by whom. Or all the spectators are supposed to maintain their own score. That's not the way things can run. It's a public system. It has to be open. And whatever data is available with the Commission, I think it should be shared with the people. There can be discrepancies, but they have to be explained. And I believe that the people of this country are reasonable enough to accept logical explanations.
Absolutely. I think the act
Can
of...
I,
Yes.
can I add some
Yes.
on the no contest issue? I have something substantially different to add, and this pertains to Nota. Now, when the Nota judgment was issued by the Supreme Court, There is a sentence in the judgment which I have quoted so many times, and now I can quote it whenever I want, which says, if more and more people use this option, political parties will be forced to put up better candidates. This is the sentence. And I'm saying this because Supreme Court uses words with great caution. There is a difference between will and shall and so on and so forth. So when they said, they did not say political parties will be encouraged to put up better candidates. They did not say political parties will be motivated to put up better candidates. They said they will be forced to put up better candidates. Now, and it said that this button should be provided. And again, in the appointment of election commissioner's case, there are several pages on the rationale for this. The Election Commission of India, in its wisdom, decided to follow the letter of the judgment and forget the spirit of the judgment. They provided a button and they made the rules such that even if one person votes for a candidate and 1999 voters out of 2000 vote for Nota, that person gets elected. This, according to me, and I have written about this multiple times, and I am tired of even describing this, but I have to. This is not the spirit of that Supreme Court judgment. The spirit of the judgment seems to be that if Nota gets more votes than any candidate, then the election should be held again with those candidates not being allowed to contest. Only then will Supreme Court hope that if more and more people use Nota, political parties will be forced to put up better candidates. If the same candidates get put up by political parties, then where do better candidates come from? Now, strangely, the Election Commission of India has not found this suggestion worthy of implementation. On the other hand, we have 28 or 29 state election commissions, which are independent constitutional bodies under the constitution directly. They are not under the Election Commission of India, and they manage the panchayat and urban local bodies elections. Two of the state election commissions, Maharashtra and Haryana, have issued notifications on this issue. Maharashtra has said that if Nota gets more votes than any other candidate, the election will be held again. They did not go all the way to say that the candidates will not be allowed to contest. But Haryana, actually Maharashtra did it after a long engagement that we had with Maharashtra over a year. Several drafts at that notification were made and they were shown to various lawyers in Bombay, and then they would be sent to us and we would comment. This was a case of collaboration. But the Haryana Election Commission on its own, after a few months of the Maharashtra notification, issued a notification saying if Nota gets more votes than any candidate, the election will be held again, and the candidates in the earlier election will not be allowed to contest. And that stands till today. So we have been trying to persuade other state election commissions to do this. There is obviously reluctance for one reason or the other. And we have been hoping that once enough number of state election commissions do it, we may show that example to the Central Election Commission and they may follow. That is our hope. I described this story because in Surat, for example, had there been an election between one candidate left in the fray and Nota, and had Nota got more votes than the candidate, I think there would be something to think about. And that solution, according to me, is preferable to the current law, as Mr. Lavasa explained to me, which I was not aware of, that if no voter votes, there is a toss of a coin and the candidate wins by chance. Now, to my mind, Nota option provides an alternative to this, which should be thought about.
Right. So thank you. Now we are slightly running out of time. There are some very important questions, but perhaps they are for another conclave by the Bangalore collective, because they're questions on first past the post system, they're questions on compulsory voting. But I think those both theoretically and just the number of issues surrounding them perhaps call for another seminar detailed specifically on those. Let me pose two questions and request each of you to give your final comments within 2 to 3 minutes. One question is, someone has asked that what can be done to reverse the damage of trust that has happened, of this sort of questioning. And I think some of the question on, say, issues of voter turnout also happened because after 2019 there were some questions. Instead of clarifying them, the ECI simply pulled down the data and tried to say that, oh, all of you couldn't count the difference between EVM and postal ballots, even though I think those are pretty elementary questions which most of us do understand. So one question is that how can the damage be reversed? And the second question is that what should we as citizens do to ensure that from now until day of counting, there is free, fair, transparent election? So that those two questions to each of you. Perhaps Mr. Lavasa first.
I think the restoring the image of the institution, it's I mean something which cannot be easily answered, and it will have substantially to do with the way the Election Commission itself reaches out to people. See, when there is some doubt or apprehension in the minds of people about an institution not being open or not being considerate or communicative, the initiative will have to come from the institution. But I think as far as the citizens are concerned, they should continue to express their concern, and they should not mind being accused of following any vested interest, because it's all part of the game. I mean, people will throw, point fingers at you. That's all right. But it is, as I said, an unfortunate situation in which the Election Commission should even think that even if for a moment, even if there is an organization which is targeting the Election Commission through a motive, even if that is the case, I think the Commission is above all this, and it should accept it in the right spirit and deal with it as an institution that believes in probity. So I think continuous dialogue, debate, discussion, the kind of things that you're having, the more awareness has to be built among people, not only to understand the importance of the election, not only to convey to the people the importance of the Election Commission, but also pointing out certain deficiencies in the system, which people should also voice. And secondly, about your question on how do you maintain, how do you ensure? Well, I think there is no option but to maintain a vigil, as I'm sure all of you are, to keep track of the data, to try and cross-verify whatever information is put out in the public through whatever sources you have. But having seen the system from inside, I only want to urge you that, there is not any scope for manipulation in the Election Commission. There are a lot of cross checks already available in the system. There are a lot of people who are keeping watch. There are lakhs of people who are involved in carrying out this process. So I find it very hard to imagine that there'll be a concerted effort on the part of everybody to manipulate. But the problem is that people have apprehensions because of lack of communication or transparency. And that is where I think transparency will have to be maintained. But as far as citizens are concerned, please question whatever you want to, but don't doubt unnecessarily.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lavasa. Jagdeep ji?
On the question of reversing the damage done on trust, I really think we need to go back to the point of appointment of election commissioners. To me, that is the most fundamental issue. And of course, we have challenged the current law that the parliament has made, but I wrote a piece in the Hindu, I think on December 22 or something, suggesting a process which is very elaborate, which involves the parliament. And to me, election commissioners are such a position that they cannot be treated with the CAG or with the director of CBI and director of vigilance, etc., etc., etc. No, the election commissioners are way, way above. Their positions are fundamental to democracy. And therefore, they must have the confidence of the parliament. And confidence of the parliament, of course, parliament itself is now in a bad state. We can have another seminar on that. But I think if we, and this was something, I mentioned this in that piece in Hindu in December 22, that 2/3 of the members of parliament should approve the appointment of election commissioners. And I thought that was a great suggestion that I made. But then when the Supreme Court judgment came out on the election commissioner's appointment, reading through the judgment, I realized that a gentleman called Professor Saxena, Shibban Lal Saxena, had made the suggestion in the Constituent Assembly. And in the Constituent Assembly debates, this issue was debated vehemently and very fiercely. And there were all kinds of suggestions. And finally, what finally went into Article 324 was a compromise suggested by Dr. Ambedkar. Whereas when I found that this 2/3 suggestion was there in the Constituent Assembly, then I thought that, look, I am no wiser than those guys, which I am in any case not. But since it has its roots there, we should think about it very seriously. And we should have, actually, the Supreme Court judgment also says, and the Constituent Assembly debates also say that we should, at that time, they were discussing only the Chief Election Commissioner. And it has been said in these words, we should have a Chief Election Commissioner who should not be afraid of asking the Prime Minister or telling the Prime Minister that you are wrong. Hey, that is the kind of people we need. Obviously, we can't bring people from the sky, although I believe there are people who are now coming from the sky also. But we can create a process which will finally discover people, and it should not be limited to the bureaucracy. I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. Lavasa may agree or disagree. I think saying that this is because people who have attained the rank of the secretary, therefore, they are beyond reproach. I am sorry. I will only say that and no more. So it should be open to any citizen under a set of criteria evolved by the parliament. You see, parliament is what the body that is answerable to us or should be answerable to us. And that parliament should take responsibility for appointing the election commissioners. So unless we can go there, which is going to be very difficult, in my opinion, but I think that is the answer to reverse this damage. Otherwise, this lack of trust, if we continue the way we are going with the, I mean, I'm sorry, the Chief Election Commissioner being given Z-class security, well, that is not the answer. The answer is transparency, openness, communication. The answer is the Chief Election Commissioner to hold a Janta Darbar. Kya baat hai? I mean, virtually ही कर ले. So therefore, I think that is the only way to restore trust. We have to find, you see, this proposal that the Supreme Court made, which we are very happy about, is also there for Director CBI. And how has that been functioning, we all know. So this proposal we have got, but I am as an individual not very satisfied with it. We need a much more robust and secure and strong system. That is the only way to regain trust. In terms of what citizens can do between now and counting, as Mr. Lavasa said, we have to be vigilant. I mean, those of us who can, we should actually guard the centers where voting machines, EVMs are stored and VVPATs, etc. are stored. And then the polling agents and candidates have to be educated. I believe somebody issued a video giving detailed instructions about what to do, what a polling agent should do. That is very useful. So polling agents and candidates, since they are the major stakeholders according to the Election Commission, they have a duty to perform. If they don't perform that duty and they expect citizens to carry the can for them subsequently, I am sorry. I am not fighting a battle on behalf of political parties. I am fighting a battle on behalf of citizens. And unless political parties do their job, I have no sympathy for them. So citizens should do what they can, but the primary responsibility according to the Election Commission is on political parties, polling agents and candidates. Thank you.
Amrita, if you permit,
Yes,
uh,
absolutely.
since Professor Choker mentioned about the Constituent Assembly, I just want to read out a quote from the speech of the chairman of the Constituent Assembly, which says, and this was also cited by the Supreme Court in one of its judgments, whatever the Constitution may or may not provide, the welfare of the country will depend upon the way in which the country is administered. That will depend upon the men who administer it. If the people who are elected are capable and men of character and integrity, they would be able to make the best of a defective constitution. If they are lacking in these, the constitution cannot help the country.
Absolutely. And I think the issue of how do you make appointments to institutions of accountability has been a vexed and long debated issue. Like Jagdeep ji said, there have been many iterations and shortcomings. But I think what Mr. Lavasa just read out, that if we actually have people committed to ensuring what their constitutional mandate is, what they are there for, and realize that there is a much longer sort of thing of building public trust, of being accountable, and it's not about one regime or another, and ultimately it's about your accountability to people at large. And it's really all of us as citizens invested deeply in the process of democracy in the country, that all of us are raising these questions, and with the hope that the election commission does take note of these concerns and actually put in place, perhaps it's time for some radical transparency to be brought in, and to show to people that there is absolutely nothing that is of doubt that may be happening, and to restore that sort of trust. And really to just sort of end by saying, as both Mr. Lavasa and Jagdeep ji said, that please be vigilant, be a vigilant voter. Simply going and pressing that button is not enough. Checking the rolls much before elections come, and between now and counting day, going to those counting centers. In fact, even just looking at them, trying to submit petitions to the RO for 17C. These are all important processes that I think all of us need to engage ourselves in. So thank you very, very much.
One word.
Ji.
What Mr. Lavasa read out was what Dr. Rajendra Prasad, chairman of the Constituent Assembly, said on the 26th of November 1949. On the 25th of November 1949, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, while commending the Constitution to the Constituent Assembly, said something very, very similar. So these two founders of the nation said that people who are assigned the task of implementing the Constitution would matter. And that is where I rest my case. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we see people coming from the same appointment process behaving very differently when serious questions come up. So on that note,
And
yes,
Amrita,
yes.
sorry,
Yes.
I think I must also apologize to all those people who have asked questions and who did not get an answer, because unanswered questions can be very disturbing.
Okay, so maybe what we can even do is we can actually send you a list of the questions, and if you'd like to respond to them, we can then communicate that back to the
Yeah,
person.
or probably you should have another session.
Absolutely. So with that suggestion to the Bangalore Collective to have another session to respond to several questions. I think there were some important questions which perhaps go beyond the mandate of today's seminar. Like I think the question on that if you have elected representatives getting elected with 20% of the mandate, how do we view that? How do we look at first past the post system? I think those are all very important questions, and perhaps it's also time as a democracy to start engaging with those questions and not shy away and simply say that the current system is what it is and there should be no questions around it. So thank you very much both to Mr. Ashok Lavasa and Professor Jagdeep Chokar. I think it's been a very interesting conversation, and both of you bring such a rich experience of several decades from your own different spaces. And thank you to everyone who's been there with us throughout this. I was noticing that we were mostly at full capacity, and there were lots of people also watching the YouTube broadcast and sending us questions from there. Thank you to the Bangalore Collective, and also thanks to all of you on behalf of the Bangalore Collective. So we'll end here. Good night and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sudeep, you could stop the live stream and